Mr. Chairman. Ambassador, thank you for your testimony. In almost all past trade negotiations, intellectual property proved to be a sticking point that required high-level political decisions from us and our trading partners at the final stages of negotiations. Given the IP concerns we have in NAFTA, especially those involving Canada's treatment of innovative life-saving U.S. medicines, what's your strategy for closing out the toughest chapters and delivering a strong IP chapter for U.S. innovators? And what are you doing to make sure that intellectual property is a top priority in these negotiations so that innovators in my state of New Jersey and others around the country will feel protected?
Well, of course, I'm sure by that you're not suggesting that I give out my strategy. But I will say this, I am in complete agreement. I think as you say, in almost every single negotiation, the IP is always the last thing to go, and the principal reason is that we're basically creators, and the people we're negotiating with are basically takers. And so they have every instinct and incentive to want to have weak laws so they can get our IP, and we have the ones to do the opposite. And ironically, and it's always a surprise to people, but it won't be to you, of course, that Canada is very much in the group of people who are the takers and not the protectors. We think of Canada as having a similar view to most things that we do, and we think they would have that way in IP. I know you know, and Senator Hatch for sure knows, that that's not the case. They have very weak laws. So it's a high priority. It's something that will go down to the end, and that I expect to I view myself as being mandated by the committee to make substantial improvements.
So the bottom line is I get concerned, since it's virtually always the last thing, that after everything else is agreed to, then why have a sticking point on IP? But I'll take from your comment, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you intend to push for strong IP standards in the NAFTA agreement.
That's absolutely true.
Okay. Now, would you agree that having credibility when negotiating is essential to developing trust and getting a good deal for the United States in these negotiations?
Yes, I would.
Did I hear you say you would? I'm sorry.
Yes, it struck me as an easy question to answer.
Okay. So, well, it would seem so, but have you ever briefed the President on the status of our trade relationship with Canada?
Are you going to ask me to go through the numbers? I'm happy to do it.
No, I know the numbers. I'm asking you, have you briefed the President?
I've talked to him a lot, yes, and he was completely right. And the numbers are all screwy, and I'm happy to spend time. I have to.
So let me read to you what your website says. USTR's website says that the U.S. goods and services trade surplus with Canada was $12.5 billion in 2016. Is that false?
So,
is that false? Yes or no?
I'm sorry. Would you repeat the question?
Sure. According to USTR's website, the U.S. goods and services trade surplus with Canada was $12.5 billion in 2016. Is that true or false? What's on your website?
If it's on there, it could be. Yeah, I'll concede that it is. I'm sure you wouldn't give me misinformation. I don't remember that number.
So if it's on your website, I would assume that you maintain that it's a truism, right?
I would assume it is a version of the numbers. I'm happy to go through these numbers with you if you like. I could spend some time on it if you like.
Well, my point is that as I think about whether it's NAFTA or any other place in the world, that credibility is important to any negotiation. So when the President has a blatant disregard for the truth when discussing our trade surplus with Canada's Prime Minister, I can't understand how that helps you in your negotiations.
Completely wrong. That's just completely wrong. So here are the numbers. 2017.
Well, what numbers are you going to give me that are different than what's on your website? Are you going to give me? No. Here's the point. I have limited time. Are you going to give me different numbers than what's on your website?
Look at. I'm happy to go through this. If you want, if you raise the issue, I'm happy to go through it. You want me to go through it?
Are you going to give me different numbers than what's on your website?
I'm going to give you the numbers. I'm happy to do it. I'll explain the issue. I know what you really want to do is get an explanation of these numbers rather than make a political point. So
what I really want to do is reconcile. If you're going to tell me something different than what's on your website, then I'm happy to listen to it. But if it's the same thing as your website, I'm not quite sure.
I'm going to give you the numbers. Can I do that or not?
Well, let me go to a last question, because I take your website to be the numbers. You told me that if it's on your website, it's true.
Unfortunately,
so to be true.
like most things in trade, it's very complicated, and there are other numbers that show a massive trade deficit with Canada. So, and I'm happy
then
to take you through.
You should change your website, because the average American, including a member of the Senate, would look at your website and it says that according to your website, U.S. goods and services trade surplus, goods and services, with Canada was $12.5 billion. So let me ask you this. Do you believe that an optional dispute mechanism is an effective way to make labor standards enforceable in NAFTA?
An optional labor, I'm sorry.
An optional dispute mechanism.
I've got to run, as the chairman knows, but I can't very well stand here and have you make this statement, which is I don't agree with at all on the issue of these trade numbers. So if you look at when people...
Ambassador, I'm asking you a different question.
Mr. Chairman, can I submit in the writing a response to the senator on the trade numbers? Thank you.
Can you answer me on the optional dispute trade mechanism?
Castle will read it. She'll hear my point.
Ambassador?
Pardon me?
Can you answer me on the optional dispute mechanism? Do you think that's an effective way to make labor standards enforceable under NAFTA?
An optional dispute? What? So you're saying, I think we ought to have labor standards enforced to the same extent other things are enforced. Yes.
Yes, an optional dispute mechanism is an appropriate way to go ahead.
Senator, your time is up. Senator McCaskill.
Mr. Chairman, I hope that witnesses in the future can be responsive to questions, because anyone can eat up my time. I've been around here long enough, 26 years between the House and the Senate, to know when there's a filibuster going on. Well, so at the end of the day, if you ask a question and you can't get an answer, and the chairman's going to say your time is up, I'd like to get an answer.
Mr. Chairman, if Senator...
I'm not against getting an answer, but...
Menendez, would you like to make sure you get an answer before you walk out of the room? I'd like to. Go ahead.
Let's give him an answer, whatever.
I think we ought to have enforceable labor standards enforced the same way everything. I guess I'm not quite getting the point of what you're saying. I think labor standards, I've been on record, I said it many times, ought to be in the agreement in NAFTA and enforced in the same way everything else is in the agreement is enforced. That's been my position from the beginning.
Okay. Senator McCaskill.